Millionaire's son, bullied single dad's daughter. But when the truth exploded in front of the entire school, every single voice went dead silent. And what happened next, no one saw coming. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The soft glow of pre-dawn light crept through the worn curtains of the modest rental home on Cedar Street. Daniel Matthews stood in the small kitchen, his calloused hands expertly cracking eggs into a mixing bowl. The quiet morning ritual brought him peace, a moment of stillness before the day began. At 48, his face showed the weathered lines of both joy and hardship. His dark hair had touches of gray at the temples, earned through years of service and the challenges of raising Claire alone. The kitchen, though dated with its faded wallpaper and well-used appliances, was spotless, a habit carried over from his military days. Daniel whisked the eggs with a fork, adding a pinch of salt and a splash of milk. The familiar movements reminded him of Sunday mornings with Sarah, Claire's mother, who had taught him this simple recipe. His chest tightened at the memory, but he smiled through it. Sarah would be proud of how their daughter was growing up. The ancient coffee maker sputtered to life, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. Daniel glanced at his watch. 5:45 a.m. Soon he'd head to Walker's auto shop, where he'd spend the day fixing other people's cars. The work was honest, but didn't pay what he wished it could. Still, it kept food on the table, and Claire in good clothes, even if they weren't the designer brands her classmates wore. He poured the egg mixture into the heated pan, watching it bubble and set. From down the hall came the sound of Claire's alarm, followed by the soft padding of teenage feet. Daniel smiled, remembering how hard it used to be to get her up for school. Now 16, she had developed her own sense of responsibility. "Morning, Dad," Claire said, appearing in the doorway. Her long brown hair was still messy from sleep, but her eyes were bright and alert. She wore simple jeans and a purple sweater. Nothing fancy, but clean and well kept. "Morning, sweetheart," Daniel replied, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs and toast across the counter. "Sleep okay?" Claire nodded, settling onto one of the mismatched bar stools they'd found at a yard sale last summer. "Yeah, thanks for breakfast." Daniel watched as she ate, noting how she seemed to grow more like Sarah every day. The same gentle spirit, the same quiet strength. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. "Big test in biology today?" he asked, remembering her studying late the night before. "Yeah," Claire said between bites. "I think I'm ready. Mrs. Peterson said it counts for 20% of our grade." "You've got this," Daniel assured her, proud of how seriously she took her studies. He'd never had the chance for college himself, but Claire, she had the brains and determination to go far. The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across their small kitchen. Daniel finished his coffee and rinsed the cup, his movements efficient and practiced. Years of military service had ingrained in him a sense of order, of making the most of every minute. Claire helped clear the dishes, working alongside her father in comfortable silence. It was their routine, this quiet morning dance in the kitchen. Daniel noticed she seemed a bit tense, her shoulders slightly hunched as she dried the plates. "Everything okay at school?" he asked carefully, knowing how tough the social scene could be at Riverside High. Claire shrugged, trying to appear casual. "It's fine, just the usual stuff." Daniel knew the usual stuff meant the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, reminders that they didn't belong to Riverside's wealthy elite. He'd seen the looks from other parents in their luxury SUVs, heard the whispers about the old pickup truck he drove. "Remember what I always tell you?" he asked, putting away the last of the dishes. "Our worth isn't in what we own," Claire recited, a small smile playing at her lips. "It's in who we are and how we treat others." "That's right," Daniel nodded, checking his watch again. "Time to head out, kiddo." They gathered their things. Claire's backpack full of carefully maintained second-hand textbooks, Daniel's worn leather work bag with his mechanic's tools. The morning air was crisp as they stepped outside, their breath visible in small clouds. The old blue pickup sat in the driveway, its paint faded, but its engine purring perfectly thanks to Daniel's mechanical skills. Claire climbed in, holding her backpack close as Daniel started the engine. The familiar rumble was comforting. even if it wasn't as quiet as the luxury cars that filled the school parking lot. They drove through the awakening town, past the manicured lawns and large homes of Riverside's more affluent neighborhoods. Daniel noticed Claire growing quieter as they approached the school, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. "Dad?" she said softly as they pulled up to the school's entrance. "Do you ever wish things were different?" Daniel put the truck in park and turned to face his daughter. The morning sun caught the gold flecks in her eyes, just like Sarah's. "Different how?" "You know," Claire gestured vaguely at the stream of expensive cars dropping off students. "Like them?" "No," Daniel said firmly, "because then we wouldn't be us. And us is pretty special, don't you think?" Claire's smile was small but genuine. "Yeah, it is." "Stay strong today," Daniel said, watching as she opened the door. "Remember who you are." Claire nodded, sliding out of the truck with her backpack. As she walked toward the school entrance, Daniel noticed Ethan Prescott standing with his usual group of friends. The boy's designer clothes probably cost more than Daniel made in a week at the shop. Ethan's eyes followed Claire with unmistakable disdain, his expression one of practiced superiority. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter, watching until Claire disappeared through the heavy school doors. Every fiber of his being wanted to protect her from the judgment and cruelty of people like the Prescotts, but he knew she had to learn to stand on her own. That was part of growing up, even if it broke his heart a little each day. Claire stood in the bustling cafeteria line, clutching her brown paper lunch bag. The familiar buzz of conversation and laughter filled the air, but her stomach tightened as she heard Ethan Prescott's voice getting louder behind her. "Well, if it isn't the mechanic's daughter," Ethan announced, his designer shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "Still carrying your lunch in a paper bag, Matthews?" Claire kept her eyes down, focusing on the scuffed linoleum tiles. She shifted her weight, trying to make herself smaller, more invisible. Her worn backpack, patched carefully by her dad last month, suddenly felt heavy on her shoulders. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Ethan persisted, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. A few heads turned their way. "Those shoes are something else. Did your dad find them in someone's trash while fixing their car?" Laughter erupted from Ethan's usual group of followers. Madison Carter, wearing her signature pearl necklace, covered her mouth with perfectly manicured fingers as she giggled. Tyler Brooks, captain of the lacrosse team, smirked and high-fived Ethan. Claire's cheeks burned. Her shoes, bought from the discount store, were clean but obviously well worn. The leather was cracking slightly at the toes, and one of the laces had been replaced with a different color when the original broke. "Look how she just stands there," Madison chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Maybe she can't afford words either." More laughter. Claire's hands trembled as she gripped her lunch bag tighter. The paper crinkled loudly in her fingers. "Hey, Matthews," Ethan continued, stepping closer. "Does your dad even make enough money to buy you new stuff? Or does he spend it all on car parts?" The cafeteria had grown quieter now, other students watching the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, others entertained, but no one stepped forward to help. Claire's throat felt tight. She thought about her dad, who worked extra hours at the garage just to make sure she had everything she needed. Who never complained, even when his hands were raw from work. Who still found time to help her with homework and cook dinner every night. "Check out her backpack," Ethan said, reaching out to flick one of the patches. "Did Daddy have to sew it himself? Bet he learned that in the army, right? Along with how to be poor?" Claire pulled away from his touch, bumping into the person in front of her in line. "Sorry," she whispered to them, her voice barely audible. "Oh, she does speak," Ethan declared triumphantly. "I was starting to think maybe living in that tiny house had made you mute." The lunch lady behind the counter watched with concerned eyes, but remained silent. Claire could feel tears building up, but she blinked them back hard. She wouldn't cry. Not here, not in front of them. "I heard their house doesn't even have a garage," Tyler added with a sneer. "Ironic for a mechanic, right?" "Probably can't afford one," Madison said, twirling a strand of her perfectly styled hair. "Just like she can't afford a real backpack." Claire finally reached the front of the line. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped her lunch bag. Without getting anything from the cafeteria, she turned and walked quickly toward the exit, Ethan's voice following her. "Running away, Matthews? Better be careful. Those cheap shoes might fall apart if you walk too fast." The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Claire kept her head down in classes, avoiding eye contact with anyone. She couldn't focus on the teacher's words, her mind replaying the cafeteria scene over and over. When the final bell rang, she waited until most students had left before heading to her locker. The halls were nearly empty as she gathered her books, carefully placing them in her patched backpack. Each time she touched the mended spots, she remembered her dad, sitting at the kitchen table, patiently sewing the tears with strong thread, telling her stories about his army days to make her laugh. The walk home felt longer than usual. The autumn air was crisp, but Claire barely noticed it. Her eyes stung with unshed tears as she trudged along the cracked sidewalk, past the neat rows of houses that grew gradually smaller and more modest as she approached her neighborhood. At home, Claire found her dad in the kitchen, stirring a pot of his famous chili. The familiar smell would normally make her mouth water, but today her stomach remained in knots. "Hey, sweetheart," Daniel said warmly, looking up from the stove. His work shirt still had grease stains from the garage, but his smile was bright as ever. "How was school today?" Claire forced a small smile, dropping her backpack by the kitchen door. "Fine," she mumbled, sliding into her usual chair at the small kitchen table. Daniel raised an eyebrow, stirring the chili slowly. "Just fine? Nothing exciting happen?" "No," Claire said quickly, perhaps too quickly. She stared at the scratched surface of the table, tracing an old water ring with her finger. "Just a normal day." "You're awful quiet," Daniel observed gently, turning down the heat under the pot. "Sure everything's okay?" Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. She couldn't tell him about Ethan's words, about the laughter, about how much it hurt. Her dad worked so hard, he didn't need to worry about her too. "Just tired," she managed to say. "Lots of homework." Daniel studied her for a moment longer, concern flickering across his face. But he didn't push, just nodded and turned back to the stove. "Well, this chili should perk you right up. Secret recipe, you know." He winked at her, trying to coax out a real smile. Claire managed a slight upturn of her lips, but her heart felt heavy. The memory of Ethan's mocking voice echoed in her head as she watched her father serve up 2 bowls of steaming chili, humming softly under his breath. Completely unaware of how his daughter's world had crumbled, just a little more today. The cafeteria buzzed with its usual lunchtime chaos. Claire Matthews stood in line, clutching her brown paper bag close to her chest. Her worn sneakers shuffled forward as the line inched along. She kept her eyes down, counting the scuff marks on the linoleum floor, hoping to make it through another lunch period unnoticed. But Ethan Prescott had other plans. "Well, if it isn't Little Miss Goodwill," his voice cut through the noise. Claire's shoulders tensed as she heard his expensive shoes clicking against the floor, approaching her. "Nice lunch bag. Did your dad fish it out of the dumpster behind his garage?" A few of his friends snickered. Claire's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Her father's words from that morning echoed in her mind. "Stay strong, sweetheart." Ethan circled around her like a shark, his designer clothes a stark contrast to her simple attire. "You know, Matthews, I drove past your dad's shop yesterday. That beaten-up truck of his really adds to the whole poverty-chic vibe you've got going." More laughter rippled through the growing crowd. Claire's fingers tightened around her lunch bag, crinkling the paper. Her father had packed her favorite sandwich today, peanut butter and banana, just like her mom used to make. "What's wrong? Can't afford words either?" Ethan leaned in closer, his perfectly styled hair catching the fluorescent lights. "Or maybe your dad couldn't afford to teach you any." Something shifted inside Claire. The memory of her father's calloused hands making her lunch that morning, how he always hummed her mother's favorite song while he worked, how he never complained about the long hours or the tight budget. It all welled up inside her. She lifted her head slowly, meeting Ethan's cold stare. The cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. "At least my dad raised me to be kind." The words came out clear and steady, carrying across the suddenly silent room. Ethan's smirk faltered, his eyes widening slightly at her unexpected response. Students who had been pretending not to watch now turned openly. A few whispers rustled through the crowd. Miss Peterson, the English teacher on lunch duty, stepped forward from her post by the wall. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her eyes moving between Claire and Ethan. Ethan stepped back, his confident posture cracking slightly. "We were just talking," he muttered, but the usual bite in his voice was gone. "Well, perhaps you should find your seat, Mr. Prescott," Miss Peterson suggested firmly. Claire watched as Ethan retreated to his usual table, where his friends waited with uncertain expressions. For the first time, he looked smaller somehow, less intimidating. Several students smiled at Claire as she made her way to her quiet corner table. Sarah Chen, a girl from her math class, who had never spoken to her before, actually gave her a tiny thumbs up. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Claire felt different, lighter somehow, as if speaking those simple words had lifted a weight she hadn't even known she was carrying. When she walked through her front door that evening, the smell of her father's famous meatloaf filled the small house. Daniel Matthews stood at the stove, still wearing his work clothes, grease stains visible on his sleeves. "There's my girl," he said, turning to greet her with a warm smile. He paused when he saw her face. "You're glowing, sweetheart. Good day?" Claire set her backpack down and moved to help him with dinner, pulling plates from the cabinet. "Actually, yeah, really good." They worked together in comfortable silence for a few minutes, setting the table and serving the food. It wasn't until they were both seated that Claire spoke again. "Dad, remember how you always say that true strength isn't about being the loudest or the richest?" Daniel set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "I do. Well, today, Ethan Prescott was making fun of us again." She saw her father's jaw tighten slightly, but he remained quiet, letting her continue. "He was saying stuff about our truck, and your shop, and—" She took a deep breath. "But this time, I didn't just stay quiet. I told him that at least you raised me to be kind." Pride bloomed across Daniel's weathered features. "You did?" Claire nodded, pushing her peas around her plate. "The whole cafeteria got really quiet, and then Miss Peterson came over, and Ethan actually backed down." She looked up at her father. "Was that okay? Standing up to him like that?" Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Claire, Bear, that wasn't just okay. That was perfect. You stood up for what's right without being cruel yourself. That's exactly what your mother would have done." Claire's eyes welled up at the mention of her mom. "Really? Really?" Daniel squeezed her hand. "You know, your mother had this saying, 'Kindness isn't weakness, it's courage wearing a gentle face.' She'd be so proud of you today, honey, just like I am." Claire wiped her eyes with her free hand, smiling. "I was thinking about her today, actually, about how she used to say that true wealth isn't in your wallet. It's in your heart," Daniel finished, his voice soft with memory. "That's right." They sat there for a moment, hands clasped across their modest dinner table, in their small but love-filled home. The evening light filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over their simple meal. In that moment, Claire felt rich beyond measure. The Friday afternoon sun streamed through the library windows, casting long shadows across the study tables. Claire sat alone in her usual corner, math textbook open before her, but her mind wandered to the morning's small victory in the cafeteria. A soft smile played on her lips as she remembered the look of surprise on Ethan's face when she'd finally stood up to him. The quiet of study period wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket. Only the scratch of pencils and occasional whispered questions broke the silence. Claire liked these peaceful moments when she could just focus on her work without worrying about sideways glances or whispered comments. A commotion outside caught her attention. Through the library's floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the school parking lot. Mr. Prescott's gleaming black luxury car was parked in the visitor's space, its chrome trim glinting in the afternoon light. Claire recognized him immediately, tall and imposing in his expensive suit, looking exactly like an older version of Ethan. A woman Claire didn't know stood nearby, holding the hand of a small boy who couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. The woman's clothes were simple but neat, and something about her posture seemed nervous, almost apologetic. The little boy pulled free of his mother's grasp and ran toward Mr. Prescott with the innocent enthusiasm only children possess. "That's him, Mommy." The boy's high-pitched voice carried clearly through the library's partially open windows. "That's the man from your pictures." Several students near the windows looked up from their books. Claire watched as Mr. Prescott's face drained of color. The woman rushed forward to grab her son's hand, but the boy kept talking, his voice rising with excitement. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The words hung in the air like suspended crystal, sharp and clear. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Around her, other students froze, their heads turning toward the windows in perfect synchronization. Mr. Prescott's reaction was immediate and harsh. "Maria," he hissed at the woman, loud enough to be heard. "What is the meaning of this? We had an agreement." The woman, Maria, pulled her son close, her chin lifting slightly despite her trembling hands. "I'm sorry, Mr. Prescott. He saw your picture in the paper yesterday. I couldn't lie to him anymore." More students gathered at the windows now, abandoning any pretense of studying. Claire remained in her seat, her heart pounding. She watched as Mr. Claire remained in her seat. Prescott grabbed Maria's arm, speaking in low, urgent tones that didn't carry through the window. The little boy began to cry, confused by the tension around him. "But," Mommy said. The boy's protests were cut short as Maria hurriedly led him away, her head bowed. Mr. Prescott stood rigid, watching them leave. When he turned back toward the school, his face was a mask of fury. The library erupted into furious whispers. Claire could hear fragments of conversations all around her. "Did you hear what that kid said? The maid's son, Mr. Prescott, and their former housekeeper. No wonder she left so suddenly last year." A girl named Jessica leaned across the table toward Claire. "Oh my God, did you see that? The perfect Prescott family isn't so perfect after all." Claire shook her head, uncomfortable with the gossip. "We shouldn't." But it was too late. The news was already racing through the school like wildfire. Students were texting under their desks, and Claire could see phones lighting up all around the library. The librarian's attempts to restore order were futile against the tide of whispered conversations. As the final bell rang, Claire gathered her books slowly, trying to avoid the crush of excited students in the hallway. But there was no escaping the buzz of conversation. Every cluster of students she passed was discussing what they'd seen or heard about the parking lot incident. Rounding the corner toward her locker, Claire came face to face with Ethan. He stood there, his usual confidence shattered, his face a mixture of confusion and rage. Their eyes met, and Claire saw something she'd never seen in Ethan before: vulnerability. For a moment, she felt a flash of sympathy. It couldn't be easy having your family's private matters suddenly become public fodder. But before she could look away, Ethan's expression hardened into something ugly and familiar. "This is your fault," he snarled, taking a step toward her. "You did this. You somehow planned this to get back at me." Claire stepped back, stunned by the accusation. "What? I had nothing to do with this, Ethan. I didn't even know." "Shut up." His voice cracked slightly. "First you embarrass me in the cafeteria, and now this? You think you're so perfect with your quiet dignity act, but you're just jealous. Jealous of everything my family has that yours doesn't." Students around them stopped to watch, their phones ready to capture any drama. Claire felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment. "I didn't do anything, Ethan," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "What happened in the parking lot has nothing to do with me." But Ethan wasn't listening. His eyes were wild with hurt and anger as he jabbed a finger toward her. "You'll regret this, Matthews. I promise you'll regret the day you ever crossed me or my family." He stormed past her, shouldering her roughly aside. Claire stumbled slightly, catching herself against the lockers. The hallway had gone quiet, everyone staring at her. She could feel their eyes on her, some sympathetic, others calculating, all of them waiting to see what would happen next. Taking a deep breath, Claire straightened her shoulders and walked to her locker. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked the combination lock, but she refused to let anyone see how shaken she was. As she gathered her things to go home, the whispers continued around her, a steady stream of speculation and rumor that she knew would only grow stronger by Monday morning. The hallways buzzed with whispers the next morning. Claire could feel the change in the air as she walked to her first class. Groups of students huddled together, their voices dropping to hushed tones when others passed by. Even the teachers seemed distracted, exchanging meaningful glances during class transitions. "Did you hear about Mr. Prescott?" Claire overheard a girl say to her friend at the water fountain. "That little boy in the parking lot yesterday." "I can't believe it," another whispered back. "My mom says she always thought something was off about how that maid left so suddenly." Claire kept her head down, clutching her worn backpack closer. She hadn't started this, but somehow she could feel Ethan's accusing stares following her everywhere. In chemistry class, she noticed the empty seats around him. His usual group of friends had mysteriously relocated to the other side of the room. During lunch, the cafeteria was unusually quiet. Ethan sat alone at his regular table, pushing food around his plate. His shoulders were hunched, his usual confident smirk replaced by a scowl. A few times he looked up and caught people staring, causing them to quickly look away. "I heard his dad paid the maid to move away," a boy named Marcus said loudly enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Guess money can't hide everything forever." Claire watched as Ethan's knuckles turned white around his fork. She felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. The boy who had made her life miserable was finally experiencing what it felt like to be the subject of cruel whispers. After school, Claire noticed parents gathering in small groups during pickup, their faces serious as they talked in low voices. Mrs. Henderson, who taught English, was speaking with Mr. Parker, the vice principal, both of them shaking their heads with concerned expressions. "The Prescotts have always acted like they're better than everyone else," Claire heard Mrs. Henderson say. "But this is something else entirely." The ride home in her father's old truck was quiet. Daniel noticed his daughter's thoughtful expression, but didn't push her to talk. They made dinner together as usual, simple hamburgers with frozen fries, when Claire's phone started buzzing with notifications. "Someone made a post about it, on the town's Facebook page," Claire said, her voice small. She handed her phone to her father. Daniel wiped his hands on a dish towel and took the phone, his eyes scanning the screen. The post was already filled with hundreds of comments, each one more dramatic than the last. Some defended the Prescotts, calling it slander. Others claimed they'd known all along about Mr. Prescott's true character. "Dad," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly, "everyone thinks I spread this around because of how Ethan's been treating me. But I didn't, I swear. I just happened to be there when that little boy." Daniel set the phone down and pulled out a chair at their small kitchen table. "Come here, sweetheart." When Claire sat down, he took her hands in his. "I know you didn't spread this. You're not that kind of person. But what if people don't believe me?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan already hates me, and now his whole family probably thinks I'm trying to ruin them." Daniel squeezed her hands gently. "Listen to me, Claire. Truth is like water. It always finds its way out, no matter how hard people try to stop it. We don't need to fear lies or what others might think. We know who we are." Claire nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I just feel bad for that little boy. He didn't ask for any of this." "That's because you have a good heart," Daniel said, standing up to check on their burgers. "Just like your mother did. She always said that kindness matters more than anything else." They ate dinner together, trying to ignore the constant buzzing of Claire's phone. The local social media channels were exploding with speculation and gossip. Some parents were calling for an emergency PTA meeting. Others wanted Mr. Prescott to step down from the school board. "Maybe I should stay home tomorrow," Claire suggested, pushing a fry around in ketchup. "No," Daniel said firmly but kindly. "We don't hide from difficulties. Remember what I taught you about my time in service? The only way through a storm is straight ahead." Claire managed a small smile. "Head up? Heart strong? That's my girl." Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her shoulder. "Whatever happens tomorrow, just remember, you didn't cause this situation. Sometimes the truth comes out in unexpected ways, but that doesn't make it any less true." They finished their dinner in comfortable silence, the sound of crickets filtering through the open kitchen window. Outside, the sky was turning purple with sunset, and a cool breeze carried the scent of approaching autumn. In their modest home, father and daughter sat together, finding strength in each other's presence, while the town buzzed with scandal around them. The truth had indeed found its way out, just as water always finds its path to the sea. And like water, it would reshape everything in its path, whether people were ready for change or not. Claire helped her father clear the dishes, their familiar routine a comfort amid the chaos. She knew tomorrow would bring more whispers, more accusations, more drama. But her father's words echoed in her mind. Head up, heart strong. Whatever came next, they would face it together, with the quiet dignity that had always been their way. Monday mornings at Riverside High usually started quietly, but today felt different. The weekend had given the whispered scandal about Mr. Prescott time to spread through text messages and social media. Students huddled in small groups, their voices dropping to hushed tones whenever anyone from the Prescott family walked by. Claire kept her head down as she made her way to her locker. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the freshly waxed floor. She could feel eyes following her, but she tried to focus on what her dad had told her that morning. Hold your head high, sweetheart. You've done nothing wrong. The metal locker door creaked as she opened it. Claire reached for her chemistry textbook, but a shadow fell across her. Her heart sank as she recognized Ethan's expensive leather shoes in her peripheral vision. Well, if it isn't the little rumor spreader. Ethan's voice dripped with venom. A small crowd began to gather, sensing drama. Claire's hands trembled as she grabbed her books. I didn't spread anything, Ethan. You know that. Oh, really? Ethan's voice grew louder, making sure everyone could hear. Then why are you the one who's suddenly getting all this attention, acting all innocent while making up lies about my family? I haven't made up anything, Claire said quietly, clutching her books to her chest. She tried to step around him, but Ethan moved to block her path. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? His face reddened with anger. Living in your tiny rental house, wearing your second-hand clothes, and pretending to be all noble and pure? The gathering crowd grew larger. Some students pulled out their phones, ready to record whatever happened next. Claire's chest tightened as she felt the walls closing in. Please, let me pass, she whispered. Instead, Ethan's hand shot out, knocking her books from her arms. They crashed to the floor, papers scattering everywhere. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Oops, Ethan sneered. Guess your dad can't afford a proper backpack to keep those secure, huh? Claire dropped to her knees, trying to gather her belongings. Her hands shook as she collected her papers, some of which had skidded under nearby lockers. She could hear snickers from some of Ethan's remaining friends, but also concerned murmurs from others. My father works honest hours doing honest work, Claire said, her voice stronger than she felt. He doesn't have to hide anything. Ethan's face twisted with rage. You little... Mr. Prescott, a teacher's voice cut through the tension. Step away from Miss Matthews immediately. The crowd scattered like startled birds. Ethan backed away, but not before hissing, This isn't over. You're going to regret ever opening your mouth about my family. Claire managed to hold herself together through her morning classes, but each hour felt like an eternity. Whispers followed her everywhere. Some students offered sympathetic glances, while others seemed to believe Ethan's version of events. By lunch, new rumors were circulating that Claire had deliberately invented stories about the Prescotts out of jealousy. The final bell couldn't come soon enough. Claire practically ran to her father's old truck, which waited faithfully in the parking lot. Daniel took one look at her face and knew something was wrong, but he waited until they were home before asking. Inside their modest kitchen, with its worn but clean countertops and the familiar smell of coffee lingering in the air, Claire finally broke down. The tears she'd held back all day burst forth like a dam breaking. They're saying I made everything up, Dad, she sobbed, collapsing into one of their mismatched kitchen chairs. Ethan pushed my books down and told everyone I'm spreading lies about his family. But I didn't. I wouldn't. Daniel's weathered hands gently squeezed her shoulders. I know you wouldn't, sweetheart. It's not fair. Claire wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Why do they believe him just because his family has money? Daniel pulled up a chair next to her, his work boots scuffing against the linoleum floor. His eyes held a distant look, as if seeing something from long ago. "You know, when I first came back from my service," he began softly, "people looked at me differently too. Here I was, a veteran who'd served his country, but all some folks saw was a man who couldn't afford a fancy house or a new car." Claire looked up at her father, through tear-stained eyes. He rarely talked about those early days after his return. "I remember taking your mother to a nice restaurant once, back when we were dating," he continued. "I'd saved up for weeks. The host took one look at my old jacket and tried to seat us by the kitchen doors." He shook his head. "Your mother, bless her heart, stood right up and said we'd rather leave than be treated that way." A small smile tugged at Claire's lips, imagining her mother's fierce spirit. "The point is, sweetheart," Daniel gently wiped a tear from her cheek, "people who judge others by their wallet instead of their character will always exist, but that doesn't mean we have to let their judgment define us." "But it hurts, Dad," Claire's voice cracked, "especially when they believe lies about us." "I know it does." Daniel pulled her into a hug, his familiar scent of motor oil and aftershave wrapping around her like a comfort blanket. "But remember what I've always told you. Truth has a way of rising to the surface, like oil in water. We just have to be patient and stay true to who we are." Claire buried her face in her father's worn work shirt, letting out the last of her tears. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background, and through the window she could see their small garden where her mother's favorite flowers still bloomed each spring. This was home, modest but full of love and truth. "Your mother would be so proud of you," Daniel said softly. "Standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." The old wooden pews of First Grace Community Church creaked as Claire shifted her weight, clutching the worn hymnal close to her chest. Around her, a dozen other teenagers from the youth group swayed gently to the piano's melody. The late afternoon sun filtered through stained glass windows, casting warm patches of colored light across the sanctuary floor. "Amazing grace! How sweet the sound!" Claire's soft voice joined the others, but even as she tried to blend in, her clear, pure tone stood out. She noticed Mrs. Peterson, the choir director, watching her intently from behind the piano. Tommy, a boy with bright red hair and freckles, fumbled the next line. The group's voices wavered and fell apart in awkward giggles. Mrs. Peterson raised her hands with a patient smile, bringing the song to a stop. "Let's take 5, everyone," Mrs. Peterson called out. As the other kids broke into chattering groups, she beckoned Claire over. "Claire, honey, could you come here for a minute?" Claire's stomach tightened. She wasn't used to being singled out, especially not after the drama at school. But Mrs. Peterson's kind eyes put her at ease as she approached the piano. "I couldn't help but notice your voice today," Mrs. Peterson said, smoothing her floral print dress. "You have a real gift, dear. Have you ever had any training?" Claire shook her head, feeling her cheeks warm. "No, ma'am. Just singing with Mom when I was little, before she passed." Mrs. Peterson's expression softened. "Your mother had a beautiful voice, too. I remember her in the choir." She paused, considering something. "You know, the school's holding their annual showcase next month. I'm on the planning committee, and we're still looking for performers." Claire's heart skipped a beat. "Oh, I don't know. Just think about it," Mrs. Peterson pressed gently. "Sometimes God gives us talents not just for ourselves, but to share with others who need lifting up." Before Claire could respond, Tommy called out from across the room. "Hey, Claire, that was really pretty. You should totally do a solo sometime." Several other kids nodded in agreement. Sarah, a quiet girl who usually sat behind Claire in English class, added, "Yeah, you could totally win the showcase." Claire felt overwhelmed by the attention. Her fingers nervously traced the edges of her hymnal. The memory of standing up to Ethan in the cafeteria was still fresh. The stares, the whispers, the aftermath, and now the thought of deliberately putting herself in front of an audience made her palms sweat. Mrs. Peterson seemed to sense her uncertainty. "Why don't you try something now, just for us?" She patted the piano bench beside her. "This is family here, Claire. No judgment, just love." The other kids gathered closer, their faces encouraging. Claire looked around at them. These weren't the same kids who had witnessed her confrontation with Ethan. These were her church friends, people who had known her since she was small. Taking a deep breath, Claire sat beside Mrs. Peterson. The piano keys gleamed in the colored light from the windows. "What would you like to sing?" Mrs. Peterson asked softly. Claire thought for a moment. "Amazing Grace? The verse we were just working on?" Mrs. Peterson's fingers found the keys, and the familiar melody filled the sanctuary. Claire closed her eyes, remembering how her mother used to sing this very song while doing dishes, her voice carrying through their little house like a warm embrace. When Claire began to sing, her voice was barely above a whisper. But as the words flowed, something inside her began to unfold, like a flower reaching for sunlight. Her voice grew stronger, clearer, filling the sacred space with pure, sweet tones that seemed to touch something deep in everyone present. "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come." The words took on new meaning as she sang them, thinking of recent events at school. "'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." When the last note faded, there, Ethan slumped in his usual spot at the back of Mr. Henderson's English class, scrolling mindlessly through his phone. The whispers around him had changed lately. Where students once hung on his every word, now they spoke in hushed tones about his family, about his father. "Did you hear Claire Matthews is performing at the showcase?" Jessica Weber whispered 2 rows ahead. "Mrs. Peterson says she has an amazing voice." Ethan's jaw clenched. He pressed his phone harder, pretending not to listen. "I heard she's dedicating the song to her mom," another girl chimed in. "You know, the one who passed away?" "That's so sweet," Jessica replied. "And brave, especially after everything that's happened." Ethan's screen cracked slightly under his thumb. Everything that's happened, like his whole world hadn't turned upside down. Like his father wasn't avoiding his eyes at breakfast. Like his mother hadn't started taking those little pink pills again. The bell rang, and students shuffled out. Ethan stayed seated, watching Claire gather her books 3 rows ahead. She moved differently now, head higher, shoulders straighter. The sight made his stomach burn. "Mr. Prescott?" Mr. Henderson called from his desk. "Class is over." Ethan grabbed his designer backpack and stormed out. In the hallway, a freshman scurried out of his path. At least some people still knew their place. The showcase posters plastered across the walls caught his eye. "Annual Spring Talent Showcase," in bold letters, with the date circled in red. His mind started turning. Claire Matthews thought she could just walk onto that stage and play the tragic hero? He'd show her what real tragedy looked like. At home that evening, Ethan paced his room, ignoring texts from his so-called friends. Their massive house felt emptier lately, with his mother resting upstairs and his father working late. Again, the marble floors echoed his footsteps as he headed to the kitchen. Rosa, their new housekeeper, quickly looked away when he entered. Everyone did that now. Looked away, whispered, pointed. All because of that stupid kid and his lying mother. All because Claire Matthews couldn't keep her mouth shut. "Young Mr. Prescott?" Rosa's voice was tentative. "Would you like dinner?" "Whatever," he muttered, grabbing a sparkling water from their sub-zero fridge. The showcase program lay on the counter. His mother was on the planning committee. Used to be, anyway. Scanning the list of performers, he found Claire's name, a solo performance. His lips curved into a bitter smile. Perfect. Across town, in the Matthews' modest ranch house, Claire sat cross-legged on her bed, sheet music spread before her. The paper was borrowed from Mrs. Peterson, who'd helped her choose the perfect song for the showcase. "Sweetheart?" Daniel knocked softly, carrying a mug of hot chocolate. "Thought you might need this." Claire's face lit up. "Thanks, Dad." She cleared space on her cluttered bedside table, carefully moving a framed photo of her mother. Daniel sat on the edge of her bed, his weight making the old springs creak. "How's the practice going?" "I think I've got the melody down," Claire said, sipping the hot chocolate. "Mrs. Peterson says I should just focus on the feeling behind the words." Daniel nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Your mother always said music wasn't about being perfect. It was about being honest." Claire traced the rim of her mug. "I keep thinking about how she used to sing while doing dishes, remember? Every day." Daniel's voice grew soft. She'd make up silly songs about soap bubbles and dirty plates. They shared a quiet moment, both lost in the same precious memory. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating Claire's walls, covered with sketches, choir programs, and photos of her with her dad. "Dad?" Claire set down her mug. "What if I mess up? What if everyone laughs?" Daniel reached over, squeezing her hand. "Then you'll keep singing. Because that's what brave people do. They keep going, even when they're scared." "Like you did? After coming home from deployment?" Daniel's eyes moistened. "Yeah, something like that." He stood, kissing her forehead. "Time for bed, kiddo. Big day tomorrow." "Night, Dad. Love you. Love you more." Daniel paused in her doorway, watching as Claire gathered her sheet music. His daughter, so much like her mother, with that same quiet strength. He sent up a silent prayer, asking for protection over his little girl's tender heart. Outside in the cool night air, parked just around the corner from the Matthews house, Ethan sat in his BMW. The leather seats still had that new car smell, his father's guilty conscience made real in German engineering. His phone glowed in the darkness as he scrolled through Claire's social media. Her accounts were mostly private, but he'd found enough. Pictures of her at church events, singing in the choir. Comments from friends about how excited they were for her showcase performance. A light went out in the Matthews house, Claire's bedroom window going dark. Ethan's fingers tightened around his phone. She thought she was so special, so above it all with her, "At least my dad raised me to be kind" speech. He opened his messages, typing quickly to a few chosen people, ones who still answered his texts, ones who could help him make sure Claire's big moment became her biggest humiliation. The phone buzzed with eager replies. Ethan smiled in the darkness, imagining Claire's face when it all fell apart. She'd learn what happened to people who messed with the Prescotts. Even if his father was too weak to fight back, Ethan would show everyone that their family wasn't finished yet. In the Matthews house, Daniel knelt beside his bed, continuing his silent prayer. He thought of Claire's courage, of her mother's smile, of all the storms they'd weathered together. "Keep her safe," he whispered into clasped hands. "Give her strength." The school hallways buzzed with excitement as Principal Warren's voice crackled over the intercom. "Attention students, our annual spring showcase is just 2 weeks away. Sign-up sheets are posted outside the auditorium. This year's theme is Finding Your Voice." Claire stood at her locker, clutching her books close to her chest. Her heart fluttered at the announcement. Down the hall, she caught Ethan's cold stare and mocking smile. He leaned against his locker, surrounded by his usual group of friends, though they seemed to stand slightly apart from him these days. "You should totally sign up, Jessica," a quiet girl from Claire's math class said. "I heard you humming in the library yesterday. You've got a beautiful voice." Claire's cheeks warmed. "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe what? Embarrass yourself in front of the whole school?" Ethan's voice cut through the hallway chatter as he approached. "I'm sure your dad can't even afford a decent outfit for the show." Jessica stepped closer to Claire, their shoulders touching in silent support. Claire took a deep breath, remembering her father's words about courage. She turned to face Ethan, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My mom always said talent doesn't come from what you wear." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, surprise, maybe even a hint of respect, before his mask of contempt returned. "Whatever, just stay out of my way." He stalked off, but Claire noticed his friends didn't follow. After school, Claire walked the 3 blocks home, kicking fallen leaves along the cracked sidewalk. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and approaching rain. Their small house looked welcoming with its faded blue paint and carefully tended flower boxes, her mother's touch that Daniel still maintained. Inside, she found her father in the kitchen, his work clothes still showing traces of motor oil despite his best efforts to clean up. He was making her favorite mac and cheese, the only recipe he'd truly mastered since her mother passed. "Dad?" Claire set her backpack down. "The school showcase is coming up." Daniel turned from the stove, his weathered face brightening. "The one where your mom used to volunteer?" Claire nodded, settling onto a kitchen chair. "I was thinking, maybe I could sing her song, the one she used to sing to me at bedtime." Daniel's eyes grew misty. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and sat across from her. "You sure about this, sweetheart? I know things haven't been easy at school lately." "I'm scared," Claire admitted, tracing patterns on the worn tablecloth. "But Mom always said being brave means doing something even when you're afraid." Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "She did say that, didn't she? Well, how about you practice it for me first?" Claire nodded and went to her room, returning with the old guitar her mother had taught her to play. The wood was scratched, but the strings were perfectly tuned. Daniel made sure of that. She settled on the couch in their small living room, beneath the family photo taken just months before her mother's illness. As her fingers found the familiar chords, Claire's voice rose soft and clear. The melody filled their modest home with memories, of bedtime stories, of summer picnics, of her mother's gentle laugh. Daniel sat in his armchair, completely still, watching his daughter transform before his eyes. The song spoke of hope and love that never dies, of finding strength in the smallest moments. Claire's voice grew stronger with each verse, no longer the shy whisper it had been when she started. When the final note faded, she looked up to find tears rolling down her father's cheeks. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "so very proud." Claire carefully set the guitar aside and moved to hug her father. His strong arms enveloped her, smelling of motor oil and home. "Do you think I'm ready?" she asked against his shoulder. "More than ready," Daniel assured her. "But let's practice every day until the showcase, just like your mom would have wanted." They spent the rest of the evening working on the song, Daniel offering gentle suggestions just as her mother once had. Outside their window, the sky darkened to purple and stars began to appear. Inside, their small living room glowed with warmth and love, the music weaving a shield around them against whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. As Claire played the song one last time, her confidence growing with each chord, Daniel watched her with a heart full of pride and bittersweet joy. In the gentle curve of her smile, the determined set of her shoulders, he saw echoes of her mother's strength shining through. The evening sun cast long shadows through the open garage door of Matthew's Auto Repair. Daniel's weathered hands worked steadily under the hood of a beaten-up Chevrolet, his fingers blackened with grease. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal filled his nostrils as he tightened the last bolt on the timing belt he'd been replacing. "Matthews," called Pete, his boss, walking over with a steaming cup of coffee. "Got another one coming in. Lady with a bad transmission. Could use your expertise if you're willing to stay late." Daniel straightened up, wiping his hands on the red shop rag, tucked into his belt. He glanced at his watch. 6:30 p.m. Claire would be home alone for dinner again. His heart ached at the thought, but the showcase was coming up, and he'd seen how Claire's eyes had lingered on that pale blue dress in the mall window last weekend. "How many hours we talking about, Pete?" 3, maybe 4. Time and a half, of course. Pete took a sip of his coffee, studying Daniel's face. "Look, I know you got Claire at home, but Johnson called in sick again, and you're the best transmission guy we've got." Daniel nodded slowly, calculating in his head. With the extra hours, he'd be closer to affording that dress. Claire deserved to feel beautiful on that stage, just like her mother always had. "I'll take it," Daniel said, reaching for his phone. "Just let me text Claire first." His fingers, still slightly grimy despite the rag, typed out a quick message. "Working late tonight, sweetheart. Leftovers in the fridge. Don't wait up. Love you." The response came quickly. "Okay, Dad. Love you too. Be safe." Those 4 simple words, "Okay, Dad," carried a weight that made his chest tight. Claire never complained, never made him feel guilty about the long hours. Sometimes he wished she would. Her quiet acceptance, so much like her mother's, only made him more determined to give her everything she deserved. The transmission job was tedious work. Daniel lost himself in the familiar rhythm of diagnostics and repairs, his mind wandering to memories of teaching Claire to ride a bike, of bedtime stories read by lamplight, of her first tentative notes on the piano at church. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 10 p.m. "You're doing good work here, Matthews," Pete said, coming by one last time before heading out. "Claire's lucky to have a dad like you." Daniel managed a tired smile. "I'm the lucky one, Pete." After Pete left, the garage felt emptier, quieter. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Daniel finished the final adjustments. His back ached from bending over the engine for hours, but satisfaction warmed his chest as he closed the hood with a solid thunk. The transmission would hold now, he'd made sure of it. By the time he cleaned up his tools and locked the garage, it was nearly 11 p.m. The drive home felt longer than usual, streetlights blurring past his tired eyes. He thought about Claire, probably already asleep, and felt that familiar mix of pride and guilt that seemed to be his constant companion these days. Their small house was dark except for the kitchen light when he pulled up. Daniel turned his key in the lock as quietly as possible, not wanting to wake Claire if she'd gone to bed. But as he stepped into the warm light of the kitchen, his heart squeezed at the sight before him. Claire was slumped over her textbooks at the kitchen table, her long brown hair spilling across her algebra homework. Her pencil had rolled just beyond her fingertips, and her breathing was deep and even. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a plate beside her, evidence of her solitary dinner. Daniel stood there for a moment, just watching her sleep. She looked so much like her mother in that moment. The same gentle curve of her cheek, the same peaceful expression. He thought about all the nights Janet had waited up for him during his deployments, how she'd fall asleep with her prayer book open beside her. Moving carefully, Daniel gathered Claire in his arms. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, instinctively curling against his chest like she used to do when she was little. She wasn't so little anymore, but she was still his baby girl, still the best thing he'd ever done in his life. The stairs creaked softly under his feet as he carried her up to her room. Her bed was already turned down. She must have been planning to go to sleep properly before homework got the better of her. Daniel laid her down gently, pulling the blanket up to her shoulders. "Sweet dreams, sweetheart," he whispered, brushing a kiss against her forehead. Claire murmured something unintelligible and snuggled deeper into her pillow. Daniel stood in her doorway for a moment longer, thinking about the showcase, about the dress they couldn't quite afford yet, about all the things he wished he could give her. But watching her sleep so peacefully, he was reminded that maybe the most important things, love, security, a father's dedication, weren't things that could be bought at all. Still, as he closed her door quietly, he thought about the extra hours he'd work tomorrow, and the next day, and however many days it took. Because sometimes love looked like grease-stained hands and aching muscles, like empty kitchen chairs and late-night carries to bed. Sometimes love looked like sacrifice, and Daniel Matthews knew all about that. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floors of the Prescott mansion. Ethan sat frozen on the grand staircase, his fingers gripping the polished banister as his parents' voices echoed through the cavernous foyer below. "How dare you embarrass me like this?" Mrs. Prescott's voice cracked with anger. "Everyone in town is talking." "Keep your voice down, mister," Prescott hissed. "The help will hear." "The help?" His mother laughed bitterly. "Like Maria? The maid you fired last month? The one whose little boy looks exactly like you?" Ethan's stomach twisted. He'd never heard his mother sound this way before. Her usual perfectly controlled tone was gone, replaced by something raw and dangerous. "Those accusations are ridiculous," his father said, but Ethan noticed the slight tremor in his voice. It was the same tremor he'd heard when his father lied about working late or missed another school event. "Don't insult my intelligence, Richard." Something crashed, probably one of Mom's expensive vases. "I've ignored the signs for years. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the money transfers to accounts I wasn't supposed to know about." Ethan pressed his palms against his ears, but he couldn't block out the words. His whole body felt cold despite the mansion's perfect temperature control. "I gave that woman a generous severance package," his father said stiffly. "A severance package?" His mother's laugh was hollow. "Is that what we're calling hush money now?" Ethan's vision blurred. He thought about the little boy in the parking lot, with his dark curly hair and familiar nose, his father's nose. The same nose Ethan saw in the mirror every morning. "Everything I've done has been to protect this family's reputation." His father's voice boomed off the high ceilings. "Our reputation?" More breaking glass. "You mean your reputation? The great Richard Prescott, real estate king of the county. Too bad you couldn't keep your crown jewel in your pants." "That's enough." Heavy footsteps crossed the marble floor. Ethan peered through the banister rails to see his father grabbing his keys from the silver bowl by the door. "Where are you going?" his mother demanded. "Running away from the truth again? I have a meeting. It's 9 o'clock at night." The massive front door slammed shut, making the chandelier tremble. In the sudden silence, Ethan could hear his mother's quiet sobs. He sat there for what felt like hours, his mind replaying every moment he'd bullied Claire Matthews, how he'd mocked her worn clothes and her father's old truck. But her father, the mechanic everyone looked down on, had never made his daughter cry like this. The next morning at school, Ethan's hands shook as he slammed his locker shut. Dark circles rimmed his eyes from a sleepless night, filled with his parents' angry words. "Hey, Ethan," called one of his usual followers. "Did you hear? Claire Matthews is actually going through with the showcase performance?" Ethan's chest tightened. He spotted Claire across the hallway, quietly organizing books in her locker. Her second-hand sweater had a small hole near the collar, but she held herself with a dignity that made his skin crawl. "What's wrong?" someone else asked. "You look terrible." "Nothing's wrong," Ethan snapped, louder than necessary. Several heads turned their way, including Claire's. Her eyes met his for a moment, and he saw something there that made him want to scream. Was it pity? No. He wouldn't let her pity him. He was Ethan Prescott. His family was perfect. They were better than everyone else in this pathetic school. "Well, if it isn't St. Clair," he called out, his voice carrying through the crowded hallway. "Planning to grace us all with your angelic voice at the showcase?" Claire's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. That only made him angrier. "I heard your dad's working extra shifts at the garage," Ethan continued, each word feeling like poison in his mouth. "What's wrong? Can't afford a proper dress on a mechanic's salary?" Students gathered around, drawn to the drama like moths to a flame. Some looked uncomfortable, others excited for the show. None of them knew about the shattered vases in his perfect house or the way his mother's mascara had run down her cheeks. "Better a mechanic who fixes things," Claire said quietly, "than someone who breaks them." The simple truth in her words hit him like a physical blow, but he couldn't back down now. Everyone was watching. "At least my mom didn't leave," he spat. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Claire's face went white, and for a moment Ethan saw the pain he'd caused. It matched the pain churning in his own gut. But before he could process what he'd done, the first bell rang. Students scattered, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, the weight of his words crushing him like his father's expensive car. Through the dispersing crowd, he caught one last glimpse of Claire's straight back as she walked away. She wasn't crying, she wasn't broken. And somehow, that made everything so much worse. Daniel Matthews' fingers traced the worn leather band of his army watch. The metal face was scratched from years of service, but the hands still kept perfect time, just like they had during his tours overseas. He'd checked this watch countless times in the darkness of night watches, during morning drills, and in moments when he needed strength. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Pete's pawn shop, casting long shadows across the glass cases filled with guitars, rings, and other pieces of people's lives traded for cash. The little bell above the door had chimed when he walked in, and now Pete, the old shop owner, studied him from behind the counter. "You sure about this, Danny?" Pete asked. His weathered face creased with concern. He'd known Daniel since high school, before the army, before marriage, before widowhood. Daniel nodded slowly, unclasping the watch. "Claire needs a dress for the showcase," he said simply. His voice was steady, but his heart ached. The watch had been with him through everything: basic training, deployment, marriage, the birth of his daughter, and Sarah's funeral. Pete picked up the watch carefully. "Military issue, good condition despite the wear." He turned it over, revealing the inscription on the back, "To Daniel Matthews for distinguished service." "I know what it's worth," Daniel said quietly. Pete sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "I'll give you more than usual. This piece deserves respect." As Pete counted out the bills, Daniel's mind wandered to Claire. She'd been practicing her song every evening, her voice growing stronger each day. But she needed something special to wear, something that would make her feel as beautiful as her mother had always told her she was. The money felt heavy in his pocket as he walked the 3 blocks to Marshall's department store. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he made his way to the formal wear section. A kind-faced saleswoman noticed his slightly lost expression. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. "My daughter. She's performing in a school showcase," Daniel explained. "She's 15. I need something." He gestured vaguely at the racks of dresses. The saleswoman's eyes softened. "What's your budget?" Daniel told her, and she nodded thoughtfully. "I think I have just the thing." She led him through the racks until she stopped at a simple but elegant dress. The fabric was a soft blue that reminded him of Sarah's eyes, the same eyes Claire had inherited. It wasn't flashy or overdone, but it had a quiet beauty that seemed perfect for his daughter. "The color would complement her complexion," the saleswoman said. "And it's on sale this week." Daniel checked the size, remembering the numbers from doing Claire's laundry. "Could you hold it while I look around a bit more?" he asked. He circled the department twice, but kept coming back to the blue dress. It was Claire, gentle, graceful, and genuine. When he finally brought it to the register, the saleswoman smiled. "Would you like it gift-wrapped?" Daniel shook his head. "Just a garment bag, please." The walk home felt longer than usual. His wrist felt naked without the familiar weight of his watch, but the dress bag draped carefully over his arm made him stand a little straighter. Claire was at youth group choir practice. She wouldn't be home for another hour. Their small rental house was quiet when he unlocked the door. He walked down the narrow hallway to Claire's room, where pictures of her mother still hung on the walls. Sarah smiling at their wedding. Sarah holding newborn Claire. Sarah at their last Christmas together. Daniel carefully laid the dress out on Claire's bed, smoothing the fabric. The afternoon sun streaming through the window made the material shimmer slightly. He placed the empty garment bag beside it and stepped back. A car door slammed outside. Claire was home early. Daniel heard her key in the lock, then her footsteps in the hallway. "Dad?" she called out. "In here," he answered. Claire appeared in the doorway, still holding her choir folder. She stopped abruptly when she saw the dress on her bed. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't move. "Is that?" she whispered. Daniel nodded. "For the showcase." Claire stepped forward slowly, reaching out to touch the soft fabric. Her hand trembled slightly. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Then she noticed the empty space on her father's wrist. Her eyes filled with tears as understanding dawned. "Dad, your watch." Her voice cracked. Before Daniel could respond, Claire threw herself into his arms, hugging him so tightly it almost hurt. He could feel her tears soaking into his shirt as she clung to him. "I love you, Dad," she sobbed. "I love you so much." Daniel held his daughter close, his own eyes growing damp. "I love you too, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair. "You're worth every sacrifice." They stood there together, father and daughter, while the afternoon sun painted the room in warm light, and the blue dress shimmered quietly on the bed behind them. The school gymnasium hummed with excited chatter as parents filed into the metal folding chairs. Paper streamers in the school colors, blue and gold, hung from the basketball hoops, swaying gently in the air conditioning. Someone had strung twinkling lights across the stage, making it look almost magical against the usual harsh fluorescent lighting. Daniel Matthews sat in the third row, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He'd changed out of his work clothes into his best button-down shirt, though a stubborn spot of engine grease still stained his weathered hands. The empty chair next to him held Claire's old jean jacket. She'd been too nervous to wear it backstage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Peterson, the music teacher, tapped the microphone. "Welcome to Highland View High's annual spring showcase." The crowd clapped politely as the first act began, the drama club's short comedy sketch about cafeteria food. Daniel smiled at the right moments, but his thoughts kept drifting to Claire, waiting somewhere behind that heavy velvet curtain. Backstage, Claire paced in small circles, her new dress swishing softly around her knees. The fabric was a soft blue that reminded her of the dress her mother used to wear to church. She gripped her microphone so tightly her knuckles turned white, then forced herself to loosen her grip when she remembered her father's words from that morning. "Just breathe, sweetheart," he'd said over breakfast. "Like we practiced." The dance team finished their hip-hop routine to thunderous applause. Claire's stomach churned as she watched them bounce off stage, high-fiving each other. 3 more acts until her turn. From her spot in the wings, she could see snippets of the audience through gaps in the curtain. She spotted Ethan Prescott sitting with his mother in the front row, his father's seat conspicuously empty. The whispers about his family's scandal had died down, but the damage was done. Ethan's usual crowd of friends had scattered to different sections of the bleachers, leaving him isolated. Water? Jenny from her math class appeared beside her, offering a paper cup. Claire took it gratefully, careful not to let her shaking hands spill any on her dress. "Thanks. You're going to be amazing," Jenny whispered, squeezing her arm. "I heard you practicing in the music room yesterday." The jazz band launched into their second number, the saxophone's smooth notes filling the gym. Claire closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. She thought about her mother, how she used to sing this same song while doing the dishes or folding laundry. The memory brought comfort instead of the usual ache. 2 acts left. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the student council president deliver his comedy monologue. She hadn't told anyone except her father, but she'd changed her song choice last minute. Instead of the safe pop song she'd been practicing, she was going to sing her mother's favorite hymn, the one about finding strength in hard times. The juggling act went by in a blur of colored balls and scattered applause. Claire felt a gentle tap on her shoulder, Mrs. Peterson gesturing her toward the stage entrance. Through the curtain gap, she could see her father sitting perfectly still, his face glowing with pride, even before she'd sung a single note. The sight steadied her nerves slightly. She noticed his wrist was bare where his army watch usually sat, and her throat tightened with emotion. The dress he'd bought her suddenly felt even more precious. The stage crew quickly set up the microphone stand. The previous performers' props were cleared away, leaving the stage stark and empty, just a single spotlight waiting to be filled. Mrs. Peterson stepped up to the microphone again. "And now, please welcome to the stage, Claire Matthews." The spotlight swung toward her position, bright and expectant. Claire took one final deep breath, remembering every word of encouragement her father had given her, every quiet moment practicing in their small living room, every memory of her mother's voice joining hers in harmony. She stepped forward as the light found her, transforming her simple blue dress into something shimmering and ethereal. The microphone waited, ready to carry her voice, her truth, out into the waiting silence. In that suspended moment before the music began, Claire caught her father's eye. His smile, warm and unwavering, reminded her that she had already won, simply by having the courage to stand there. The rest was just grace notes in an already beautiful song. Claire stepped into the spotlight, her heart hammering against her ribs. The simple blue dress her father had bought her caught the light, making her feel like she was wrapped in starlight. Her fingers trembled around the microphone as she gazed out at the sea of faces before her. In the front row, Daniel sat straight-backed in his work clothes, still carrying the smell of motor oil from the shop. He'd rushed straight from work to be here, and his weathered face held nothing but love and encouragement. Their eyes met, and Claire drew strength from his gentle nod. The first notes of the piano filled the gymnasium. Claire closed her eyes, remembering how her mother used to sing this very song while cooking dinner or folding laundry. Her voice came out soft at first, barely a whisper. "In the quiet moments, when the world stands still, I feel you near me, and I always will." Her voice wavered on the first verse, thick with emotion. Some students in the audience shifted in their seats, and she heard a few whispers. But then she thought of her mother's smile, of her father's sacrifices, and something deep within her chest began to unfold, like a flower reaching for the Sunday. The second verse came stronger, her voice lifting clear and pure. "Through the storms and sunshine, through the joy and pain, your love surrounds me, like soft summer rain." The whispers died away. Claire opened her eyes to see several teachers dabbing at their faces with tissues. Mrs. Peterson, her English teacher, had both hands pressed to her heart. In the third row, Ethan Prescott sat with his arms crossed, but his usual smirk had faded. His eyes were wide, fixed on Claire as if seeing her for the first time. The harsh gymnasium lights caught the slight shine in his eyes. As Claire moved into the chorus, her voice soared, filling every corner of the room. You taught me courage. You showed me grace. Your light still guides me through time and space. Though you've gone ahead to heaven's shore, your love lives on forevermore. An elderly woman in the back began to cry openly. Several parents held hands, leaning into each other. Daniel's shoulders shook slightly as he watched his daughter shine. Claire's voice grew stronger with each note, years of quiet pain and love pouring out through the melody. She sang about morning pancakes and bedtime stories, about scraped knees, kissed better, and lullabies in the dark. She sang about a mother's love that even death couldn't dim. The final verse came softer, intimate, like a prayer. And when I'm lost or feeling small, I remember you gave your all. Your strength lives on in who I am. Your love still holds me where I stand. As the last note faded, Claire opened her eyes to complete silence. For one terrible moment, her heart stopped. Then she saw the tears streaming down faces throughout the audience. Mr. Roberts, the stern math teacher, was openly weeping. Several students had their arms around each other. The silence held for another breath, then broke as someone in the back began to clap. The sound spread like wildfire, and suddenly the entire gymnasium was on its feet. The applause thundered against the walls, punctuated by cheers and whistles. Daniel stood slowly, tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. His hands shook as he clapped, pride radiating from every inch of him. When Claire found his eyes in the crowd, she saw in them everything her mother had ever wanted for her: strength, grace, and the courage to stand tall. Near the middle of the crowd, Ethan Prescott rose to his feet more slowly than the others. The usual hardness in his face had melted away, replaced by something that looked almost like awe. For the first time since she'd known him, there was no mockery in his expression, no cruel judgment waiting to be unleashed. Instead, he looked at her with what could only be described as respect, maybe even admiration. Claire's knees felt weak as she managed a small curtsy. The applause continued, rolling over her in waves. She saw Sarah Martinez, who had always been kind to her, jumping up and down, cheering. Even Principal Stevens was wiping his eyes while trying to maintain his dignified composure. When she finally made her way off the stage, her legs trembling, she nearly collided with Miss Wilson, the music teacher. The older woman wrapped her in a fierce hug. "Your mother would be so proud," Miss Wilson whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "So very proud." The applause still hadn't died down as Claire made her way back to her seat. Students reached out to squeeze her hand as she passed. Jenny Cooper, who had never spoken to her before, gave her a tearful hug. Even Tommy Martinez, one of Ethan's former friends, nodded at her with genuine respect. As she sank into her chair beside her father, Daniel's strong arm went around her shoulders. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The gentle squeeze of his embrace said everything. About love, about loss, about the pride that was too big for words. In that moment, sitting in the warm circle of her father's arm while the applause gradually faded, Claire felt her mother's presence more strongly than she had in years. She wasn't just a memory anymore, but a light that lived on through the love between a father and daughter who had faced every storm together. Several rows away, Ethan Prescott watched them, his usual mask of superiority completely gone. For the first time, he saw not their worn clothes or their modest means, but the wealth of love and courage that no amount of money could buy. The applause still echoed through the gymnasium when the heavy double doors burst open with a bang. Mr. Prescott's tall figure stormed down the center aisle, his expensive suit jacket flapping behind him like dark wings. His face was red with fury, and his perfectly styled silver hair seemed disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it in agitation. Claire's moment of triumph shattered. The microphone trembled in her hands as she watched Mr. Prescott march toward the stage. The audience's cheering died away, replaced by confused murmurs and worried whispers. "This ends now," Mr. Prescott's voice boomed through the gym. He jabbed an accusing finger toward Claire, still standing in the spotlight. "You and your father have been spreading vicious lies about my family." Mrs. Harrison, the music teacher, stepped forward. "Mr. Prescott, please. This is a school event." "No," he cut her off, his voice sharp as a knife. "I won't stand by while this mechanic's daughter and her father try to destroy everything I've built." Daniel Matthews rose from his seat in the third row. His movements were calm and deliberate, but his jaw was set tight. "Mr. Prescott," he said, his voice steady but firm. "This isn't the time or place." Claire's hands shook so badly she had to set the microphone down. The beautiful dress her father had sacrificed so much for suddenly felt too tight, too exposed under the harsh spotlight. She wanted to disappear. "Oh, isn't it?" Mr. Prescott sneered. He turned to address the crowd of parents, teachers, and students. "You've all heard the rumors, haven't you? The whispers these two have been spreading about me?" His voice dripped with contempt. A respected businessman being accused by these people? The gym had grown so quiet you could hear the old heating system clicking in the walls. Claire's eyes searched for Ethan in the crowd. She found him slumped in his seat, face burning red, looking like he wanted to sink through the floor. "My son comes home every day telling me how this girl and her father are behind these malicious stories," Mr. Prescott continued, his voice getting louder. "They're jealous of our success, trying to tear down those who've worked hard for everything they have." Daniel took another step forward. His voice remained level, but Claire could see the muscle twitching in his cheek, a sure sign he was angry. "Mr. Prescott, my daughter just finished performing. She's never spread a single rumor about you or your family." "Lies," Mr. Prescott spat. "You're nothing but a bitter man who can't accept his station in life. Teaching your daughter to destroy others won't make you any less of a failure." Gasps rippled through the audience. Claire felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she fought them back. She wouldn't let them see her cry. Mrs. Prescott, who had been sitting rigid in her seat, finally stood up. "Richard, please," she whispered, but her husband waved her off. Daniel's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. "I've taught my daughter to be honest, to work hard, and to treat others with kindness, even those who don't deserve it." He moved toward the stage. "Claire, honey, come down." Claire took a shaky step toward the stairs, but Mr. Prescott moved to block her path. "Don't you dare try to walk away from this. Everyone needs to know what kind of people you really are." Principal Wagner finally pushed through the crowd. "That's enough, Mr. Prescott. You need to leave. Now." "Oh, I'll leave," Mr. Prescott said, his voice dangerous and low. "But everyone here should know that these Matthews are nothing but lying manipulators. They've been spreading filth about my family, trying to ruin us, and I won't stand for it." Claire finally found her voice. "I never said anything about you," she said, her words quiet but clear in the silent gym. "The little boy who spoke to you in the parking lot, I didn't make him say those things." Another wave of gasps swept through the crowd. Mr. Prescott's face went from red to purple. "How dare you!" he roared. "You little—" "Richard!" Mrs. Prescott's sharp voice cut through his rage. She stood trembling, her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. "Stop this! Now!" But the damage was done. The whispers had already started. Claire could see people turning to each other, speaking behind their hands. The same people who had been crying during her song minutes ago now looked at her with suspicion and judgment. Daniel reached the stage and held out his hand to Claire. "Come on, sweetheart," he said softly. His palm was warm and solid as she gripped it, careful not to trip on her dress as she descended the stairs. The spotlight followed them, casting their shadows long across the gymnasium floor. Claire could feel hundreds of eyes on them, could hear the hushed conversations growing louder. Her father's hand squeezed hers gently, but she could feel it trembling slightly. "This isn't over," Mr. Prescott called after them, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "You can't hide behind your sad songs and your false modesty forever." Claire kept her head high as she walked with her father toward the exit, just as he'd taught her. But each whisper that reached her ears felt like a tiny needle in her heart. The same people who had given her a standing ovation now shrank away as they passed, as if poverty and scandal were contagious. Just before they reached the doors, Claire heard Ethan's voice rise above the murmurs. "Dad, stop, please." But Mr. Prescott's only response was a sharp, "Be quiet, Ethan." The heavy gym doors closed behind them with a dull thud, but it couldn't completely muffle the buzz of gossip that had erupted in their wake. Claire's legs felt weak, and she gripped her father's hand tighter. "You did nothing wrong," Daniel whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Nothing." But as they stood there in the empty hallway, the muffled sounds of judgment seeping through the walls, Claire had never felt more wrong in her life. Her moment of triumph had turned to ashes, and all she could do was hold onto her father's trembling hand and try to be brave. The kitchen clock ticked past midnight in the Matthews' modest home. Daniel sat at their small wooden table, his calloused hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. The events of the evening played over and over in his mind, like a broken record. Mr. Prescott's angry accusations, the shocked faces in the crowd, and worst of all, the way Claire's moment of triumph had shattered into pieces. Claire stood in the doorway of her bedroom, watching her father. She had changed out of her new dress, now wearing her favorite worn pajamas with little music notes on them. Her eyes were red but dry. She had no more tears left to cry. "Dad?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel looked up, trying to mask his worry with a weak smile. "Hey, sweetheart, you should be sleeping." "I can't." Claire padded across the linoleum floor in her sock feet and slid into the chair across from him. "I keep thinking about everything." Daniel pushed his coffee aside and reached for her hand. "I've been thinking too. Maybe." He paused, his voice heavy. "Maybe we should look at other schools. Somewhere you could have a fresh start." "No." Claire's response was immediate and fierce. She gripped her father's hand tighter. "Dad, please, we can't let them win like that." "It's not about winning or losing, Claire. Bear." Daniel used his old nickname for her, the one that usually made her smile. This time, she just shook her head stubbornly. "It's about protecting you. What Mr. Prescott did tonight, that was just the beginning. People like him, they have money, influence." "And we have the truth," Claire interrupted. She sat up straighter, looking so much like her mother that it made Daniel's heart ache. "You always taught me that truth matters more than anything else. That's what you learned in the service, right? Standing up for what's right, even when it's hard?" Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. The empty spot on his wrist where his pawned watch used to be seemed to burn. "Sometimes being a parent means making tough choices to keep your child safe. But running away isn't safe," Claire argued. Her voice softened. "It just teaches me that bullies win, that money wins, that lies win." She looked down at their joined hands. "Mom wouldn't want us to run." The mention of his late wife hit Daniel hard. He remembered Sarah's fierce spirit, how she'd faced every challenge with quiet determination. Even in her final days, she'd never given up hope. "The kids at school," Daniel started. "Some of them believe us," Claire said. "After my song tonight, before Mr. Prescott came in, I saw it in their faces. They know who's telling the truth." She squeezed his hand. "And the ones who don't, well, you always say other people's opinions don't define us." Daniel studied his daughter's face. When had she grown so wise? The shy little girl, who used to hide behind his legs, was becoming a young woman of remarkable strength. "It's not just about school," he said slowly. "Mr. Prescott might try to cause trouble at my job. People might start talking." "Let them talk," Claire said firmly. "We haven't done anything wrong. We didn't start those rumors about him. We're just trying to live our lives with dignity. That's what you always say." Daniel stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, looking out at their small backyard where Claire's tire swing still hung from the old oak tree. How many times had he pushed her there, her laughter filling the air? How many times had he promised to protect her? "Dad?" Claire's voice was gentle now. She came to stand beside him. "Remember what you told me when I first started getting bullied? That sometimes the bravest thing we can do is just show up the next day with our heads held high?" Daniel turned to look at his daughter, seeing in her face all the hope and courage he'd tried to instill in her over the years. "When did you get so strong?" "I learned from you." Claire wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his worn work shirt. "Please don't let them chase us away. Please." Daniel held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. The weight of responsibility pressed heavy on his shoulders, but underneath it, he felt a glimmer of pride. His daughter wasn't running. She was standing firm in her convictions. "Okay," he said finally. "But promise me something." Claire looked up at him. "What?" "Promise you'll tell me everything. No more hiding when things get tough. We face this together. I promise." Claire's smile was tired but genuine. "Can I stay up a little longer?" Daniel shook his head, gently steering her toward her bedroom. "School tomorrow, remember?" Heads held high. Claire crawled into bed, and Daniel pulled her quilt up to her chin, the same quilt Sarah had made when Claire was born. "Dad?" she murmured, already half asleep. "I'm glad we're staying." "Me too, sweetheart." Daniel smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Me too." As Claire's breathing evened out, Daniel knelt beside her bed. In the dim light filtering through her curtains, he could just make out the photo of Sarah on the nightstand, smiling that radiant smile he missed so much. Closing his eyes, he bowed his head, his whispered prayers filling the quiet room as he asked for wisdom and strength to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Ethan Prescott lay on his king-sized bed, staring at the elaborate crown molding that lined his bedroom ceiling. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked 1:23 a.m., but sleep wouldn't come. Claire's song from the showcase kept playing in his mind, her clear voice haunting him with its raw emotion and truth. He rolled over, punching his silk-covered pillow in frustration. The memory of his father storming into the gym, face red with anger, made his stomach churn. The way Mr. Prescott had pointed at Claire and her father, accusing them of spreading lies. It didn't sit right anymore. Nothing did. Through his window, moonlight cast shadows across his collection of trophy cases and expensive gaming systems. All these things that had once made him feel superior now seemed hollow, meaningless. "This is stupid," he muttered, sitting up and running his hands through his disheveled hair. But he couldn't shake the image of Claire's face when his father had accused her. The hurt in her eyes wasn't fake. He knew that now. After years of tormenting her, he'd become an expert at reading her expressions. Ethan walked to his window, looking out at the manicured lawn of their mansion. Security lights illuminated the perfectly trimmed hedges and the fountain that never stopped running. Everything was perfect on the outside. Everything was a lie. He thought about the little boy in the parking lot, the one who had called his father Daddy. The way his father had paled, then quickly ushered the child and his mother away. The whispered conversations between his parents late at night. The arguments that grew louder each day. "Master Ethan?" A soft knock accompanied the voice of their housekeeper. "Is everything all right? I saw your light on." "I'm fine, Mrs. Chen," he called back, his voice rougher than he intended. "Just studying." He heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway. More lies. Always lies. Grabbing his phone, Ethan scrolled through his social media feeds. His usual crowd of friends had been posting less and less about him lately. Instead, clips of Claire's performance filled their stories. The comments were full of praise for her courage and talent. A message popped up from Brandon, his former best friend. "Maybe you should stop being such a jerk. Claire never did anything to deserve this." Ethan threw his phone onto the bed. The worst part was, Brandon was right. Claire had never done anything except exist. Exist with less money, less status, less everything that Ethan had been taught to value. But she had something else. Something that made his chest ache when he thought about it. She had truth. She had dignity. She had a father who worked honest hours and bought her second-hand clothes, but looked at her with genuine pride. Getting up again, Ethan paced his room, his bare feet silent on the plush carpet. The showcase played through his mind again. Claire, in that simple dress, singing about her mother, about love and loss and hope. No designer labels, no expensive jewelry, just pure heart. And the way her father had watched her, tears streaming down his weathered face. Ethan's own father had missed most of his school events, always too busy with important meetings. When he did show up, it was to make sure Ethan was maintaining the family image, not to actually see him perform. Dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting his room in soft grays. Ethan hadn't slept at all, but his mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. He showered and dressed mechanically, avoiding the breakfast table where he could hear his parents arguing in hushed, angry tones. School that day passed in a blur. He noticed things he'd been blind to before: how Claire kept her head high despite the whispers, how she helped a freshman pick up dropped books, how she smiled genuinely at everyone, despite their previous treatment of her. When the final bell rang, Ethan didn't head to his car. Instead, he walked to the library and opened his laptop. After a few searches, he found what he was looking for: the Matthews address. It wasn't in any of the prestigious neighborhoods he knew. It was on the other side of town, in a modest area near the auto shop where Mr. Matthews worked. He spent hours driving around his own neighborhood, trying to work up the courage to go there. As the sun began to set, he finally pointed his car toward their street. The houses here were small, with worn paint and chain-link fences, but many had flower gardens or children's bikes in the yards. They looked lived in, real. Pulling up to the Matthews house, Ethan's hands shook on the steering wheel. Their home was tiny compared to his, with mismatched curtains in the windows and a small vegetable garden along one side. Mr. Matthews' old truck sat in the cracked driveway. Through a window, he could see Claire and her father at their kitchen table, sharing what looked like a simple dinner. Ethan sat there for nearly an hour, watching occasional shadows move across the windows, gathering his courage. Finally, as the streetlights flickered on and moths began dancing around their yellow glow, he stepped out of his car. His designer shoes crunched on the gravel path leading to their front door. Each step felt heavier than the last. What would he say? How could he possibly make up for years of cruelty? Would they even open the door when they saw who it was? Standing on their small concrete porch, Ethan raised his hand and knocked, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The porch light cast long shadows across Daniel Matthews' weathered face as he opened the front door. His expression hardened when he saw Ethan Prescott standing there, shoulders hunched, looking smaller somehow without his usual swagger. The boy's expensive jacket seemed out of place on their modest porch. "Mr. Matthews," Ethan's voice cracked. "I know it's late. I'm sorry, but I need to talk to you." Daniel crossed his arms, protective instincts flaring. This was the boy who had caused his daughter so much pain. "It's almost 9 o'clock, Ethan." "Please, sir, 5 minutes? That's all I'm asking." Something in the boy's tone made Daniel pause. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. After a long moment, Daniel stepped aside, letting Ethan enter their small living room. Family photos lined the walls: Claire's mother smiling from simple frames, Claire's grade school achievements, Daniel in his military uniform. Ethan glanced at them, shifting uncomfortably on his feet. "Sit down," Daniel said, his voice firm but not unkind. He gestured to their worn but clean sofa. Ethan sank into the cushions, hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've been awful to Claire," he blurted out. "The things I said, the way I treated her, it was wrong. All of it." Daniel remained standing, his face unreadable. In the kitchen, a cup clinked quietly. Claire was doing the dishes, probably listening to every word. "The rumors about my father," Ethan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Claire didn't spread them. She never said a word. I knew that, but I was so angry, so scared of everything falling apart." His voice caught. "I blamed her because it was easier than facing the truth." The boy's shoulders began to shake. Daniel's expression softened slightly as he watched tears form in Ethan's eyes. "My whole life, I thought we were better than everyone else. My father taught me that money meant respect, that looking down on people like," he gestured around the modest room, "like your family, was okay, but now I know he's been living a lie." The sound of running water in the kitchen had stopped. The house was completely silent. "That little boy really is my half-brother, isn't he?" Ethan's voice cracked again. "My father, he fired Maria, paid her to keep quiet, but everyone knows now. And instead of telling the truth, he's trying to destroy your family's reputation." Daniel finally sat down in his old armchair, studying the boy before him. "Why are you telling me this, Ethan?" "Because I can't sleep at night anymore," Ethan admitted, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "Claire's song at the showcase. the way she honored her mother, how everyone could feel the love in her voice. And then my father stormed in, trying to ruin even that beautiful moment with more lies. He looked up at Daniel, his face filled with shame. I've been raised by a hypocrite who preaches about family values while destroying families. And I've become just like him. A floorboard creaked near the kitchen doorway. Neither Daniel nor Ethan turned to look, but they both knew Claire was there, listening. "Mr. Matthews, I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Ethan continued, his voice steadying slightly, "but I needed you to know that Claire never did anything wrong. She's been nothing but strong and dignified, even when I was horrible to her. You raised her right, sir. Everything I said about you both, I was wrong." Daniel leaned forward in his chair, his military training evident in his straight posture. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, son. But what matters more is what you do next." "I know," Ethan nodded, looking down at his hands. "I can't fix what my father's done, but I can stop being part of his lies. I can tell the truth." A small gasp came from the kitchen doorway. Claire stood there now, dish towel still in her hands, her eyes wide as she stared at Ethan. "Claire!" Ethan jumped to his feet, startled. "I'm so sorry. For everything. The cruel words, the shoving, the lies. You didn't deserve any of it." Daniel watched as his daughter stepped into the room, her face a mixture of shock and cautious hope. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and the possibility of healing. "You really mean it?" Claire asked softly. "You're not just saying this because—" "I mean every word," Ethan interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "Your song tonight, it showed me what real strength looks like. Not my father's money or his power plays, but your kind of strength. The quiet kind that stays true no matter what people say." Daniel stood up slowly, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. He could feel her trembling slightly, processing this unexpected turn of events. "Sir?" Ethan turned back to Daniel. "I know things at school are going to get worse before they get better. My father, he won't stop trying to protect his reputation. But I want you both to know that I won't be part of it anymore. I can't change who my father is, but I can change who I'm becoming." The old clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the weight of this moment. In the humble living room of the Matthews home, surrounded by photographs of a family built on love rather than luxury, something shifted. The walls that privilege and prejudice had built began to crumble, one honest word at a time. Daniel stood in the doorway, his weathered face a mix of surprise and caution as he studied the boy who had caused his daughter so much pain. The evening air was cool, and crickets chirped in the background, creating a strange, peaceful backdrop to this tense moment. "Mr. Matthews," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking smaller somehow without his usual crowd of followers. "I heard about the school board meeting next week. They're going to discuss everything that's happened." Daniel crossed his arms, not unkindly, but protectively. Behind him, Claire lingered in the shadows of the hallway, listening. "Yes, we received the notice," he said simply. "I want to speak at the meeting," Ethan blurted out. His hands were trembling, and he shoved them into his pockets. "I need to tell everyone the truth. About my father, about how I treated Claire. All of it." Daniel's expression softened slightly, but concern creased his brow. "Ethan, do you understand what you're saying? Speaking against your father publicly, that's not something you can take back." "I know." Ethan's voice cracked. He looked down at his expensive sneakers, now scuffed from kicking at the ground. "My whole life, I've had everything handed to me. But watching Claire sing tonight, seeing how brave she was." He paused, swallowing hard. "She had every reason to hate me, to want revenge. But she just got up there and sang about love and loss, and I've never been that honest about anything in my life." Daniel uncrossed his arms, letting them fall to his sides. "Son, this isn't just about telling the truth. Your father is a powerful man. There will be consequences." "There already are consequences," Ethan said, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "That little boy, Tommy, he's my half-brother. I heard my parents fighting about it. Dad's been paying off the maid's family for years to keep quiet. And I've been awful to people like Claire, just to feel better about myself." His voice grew stronger. "I can't live with lies anymore." From the hallway, Claire stepped into view, her face showing a mixture of compassion and disbelief. Daniel glanced at his daughter, then back at Ethan. "The board meeting," Daniel said carefully. "It won't be easy. There will be press, parents, teachers. Your father's lawyers will probably be there." "I don't care," Ethan insisted, though his voice shook. "Well, I do care. I'm terrified. But I'm more scared of living like this forever. Pretending to be something I'm not. Hurting people to protect secrets." He looked directly at Claire. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." Daniel watched as his daughter moved forward to stand beside him. Claire's quiet strength, so like her mother's, filled him with pride. "What exactly would you say at the meeting?" Daniel asked, his tone gentler now. Ethan straightened his shoulders. "The truth. That I bullied Claire because I was jealous of her integrity. That my father's been living a lie, and I helped cover it up by being cruel to anyone who threatened our family's image." He took a deep breath. "And that Claire never spread any rumors. She's the only one who's been honest all along." Daniel leaned against the doorframe, his military training evident in his steady gaze. "You understand your father might cut you off? Your life could change completely. Maybe it needs to," Ethan replied, his voice barely audible but firm. "My whole life, I've been proud of things that don't matter. Money, status, power. But watching Claire these past few weeks," he gestured helplessly. "She has real pride, the kind that comes from doing what's right, even when it's hard." Claire stepped forward. "Ethan, are you sure about this?" He nodded, meeting her eyes. "For the first time in my life, yes. I'm sure about something." He turned back to Daniel. "Mr. Matthews, I know I don't deserve your help. But I'm going to tell the truth at that meeting, and I could really use someone in my corner who knows about standing up for what's right." Daniel studied the boy before him. He saw past the expensive clothes and privileged upbringing to something else, a young man at a crossroads, choosing the harder but better path. It reminded him of choices he'd made in his own life, particularly during his military service, when doing the right thing often came at a personal cost. "If you're serious about this," Daniel said slowly, "if you're truly ready to stand up and tell the truth, no matter the consequences." He paused, weighing his words carefully. "Then, yes, I'll stand with you." Relief flooded Ethan's face, followed quickly by fear, then determination. "Thank you, sir. I know it won't fix everything, but it's a start." Daniel nodded slowly. "Sometimes," he said, "the bravest thing isn't charging into battle. Sometimes it's simply standing up and telling the truth, even when your voice shakes." "The meeting's on Tuesday," Ethan said, his voice steadier now. "I'll be there, I promise." "Then so will we," Daniel replied. And in that moment, he saw something change in Ethan's eyes. A flash of the man this boy could become, once freed from the weight of lies and pretense. As they stood there on the modest porch of the Matthews home, the evening crickets still chirping their steady song, Daniel recognized the cost of what was to come. But he also knew, with the certainty that had guided him through war and loss and single parenthood, that standing for truth was always worth the price. The gymnasium buzzed with whispered conversations and shuffling feet. Metal folding chairs creaked under the weight of concerned parents, curious students, and watchful teachers. The usual smell of floor wax and rubber balls was overwhelmed by perfumes and aftershaves from dressed-up adults. Claire sat between her father and Mrs. Johnson, her favorite English teacher. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and she could feel her heart pounding against her ribs. Daniel placed his weathered hand over hers and squeezed gently. "Remember what I always tell you," he whispered. "The truth has nothing to fear," Claire finished, managing a small smile. At the front of the gym, the Prescott family commanded attention without trying. Mrs. Prescott wore a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. Her perfectly styled hair caught the harsh fluorescent lights, and her face was a mask of practiced calm. but Claire noticed how her manicured fingers kept adjusting and readjusting her pearl necklace. Mr. Prescott sat like a king on his throne, even though it was just another metal folding chair. His expensive suit seemed out of place in the humble school gym. He kept checking his gold watch and whispering to his lawyer, a stern-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses who hadn't smiled once since arriving. Principal Harris stood at the podium, shuffling papers and clearing his throat. The microphone squealed briefly, making everyone wince. Behind him, members of the school board sat at a long table, their faces serious. "I saw the former maid in the parking lot," someone whispered 2 rows behind Claire. "With her little boy. Did you see how much he looks like?" "Shh." Claire tried to block out the gossip. She focused instead on the small American flag standing in its holder beside the podium, remembering how her father had taught her to fold one properly during his military days. More people filed in. The basketball hoops were pulled up to the ceiling, and the bleachers were pushed back against the walls, but the gym still felt cramped with so many bodies. The tension in the air was thick enough to touch. Ethan sat rigidly beside his mother, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. His shoulders were hunched, and he kept wiping his palms on his dress pants. Gone was the arrogant bully who had tormented Claire for months. In his place sat a scared teenager who looked like he might be sick. Claire remembered his visit to their house the night before. How his voice had shaken when he'd apologized. How genuine his tears had seemed when he'd admitted knowing the truth about his father. She still wasn't sure if she could trust him, but something had changed in those moments. A group of Ethan's former friends huddled together near the back of the gym. They pointed and whispered, no longer showing the loyalty they'd once had for their leader. Claire felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. She knew what it was like to be the subject of whispers. "I heard the Prescotts are threatening to sue," a teacher murmured nearby. "Over what? The truth?" another responded. Daniel shifted in his chair, his jaw tight. Claire knew he was thinking about the pawn shop where his cherished army watch, now Saturday, about all the extra hours at the garage. About every sacrifice he'd made to give her a good life. Mr. Prescott's accusations had struck deep, questioning not just their honesty, but their very dignity. Mrs. Prescott leaned over to straighten Ethan's tie. He pulled away from her touch, something Claire had never seen him do before. His mother's hand hung in the air for a moment, before dropping to her lap, her perfect composure cracking just slightly. The former maid and her son slipped in through the side door, taking seats near the back. The little boy clutched a worn teddy bear, looking confused by all the grown-ups and the tension. His mother held him close, her chin lifted despite the stares. Principal Harris tapped the microphone. "If everyone could please take their seats." The rustling and murmuring gradually died down. Claire watched as Mr. Prescott leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs casually, as if this were just another business meeting where he held all the cards. His lawyer opened a leather briefcase, pulling out a thick stack of documents. "This emergency meeting of the school board," Principal Harris began, his voice steady but careful, "has been called to address recent concerns about certain allegations and their impact on our school community." Claire felt her father's hand tighten over hers again. She looked up at him, seeing the same strength in his face that had carried them through her mother's death, through countless tight months, through every challenge life had thrown their way. Across the room, Ethan's eyes met hers. The gym's harsh lighting showed the dark circles under them, evidence of his sleepless night. His right leg bounced nervously, and he kept glancing between his father and Claire. She remembered his words from the night before. "I have to tell the truth. I can't live with lies anymore." Now, as Principal Harris called the meeting to order, Ethan's face was pale but determined. He straightened his shoulders slightly, and Claire recognized the look of someone gathering their courage. It was the same look she'd seen in her mirror the day she'd finally stood up to him in the cafeteria. The truth would cost him everything he'd once valued: his popularity, his father's approval, his family's perfect image. Yet here he sat, ready to speak it anyway. Claire felt a sudden surge of respect for her former tormentor. Maybe her father had been right about another thing he always said. That character reveals itself not in easy times, but in moments of hard choices. Principal Harris adjusted his glasses, preparing to continue. The room held its collective breath, waiting for what would come next. But in that moment, suspended between revelation and consequence, Claire saw Ethan's hands stop shaking. He sat up straighter, and when he looked at her again, she saw something new in his eyes. Not the cruelty of before, but the steady gaze of someone who had finally chosen their path. The gymnasium hummed with tense murmurs. Parents shifted in their metal folding chairs, while teachers lined the walls, their faces tight with concern. At the front, a long table held the school board members, their expressions grave as they shuffled through papers. Mr. Prescott sat in the front row, his expensive suit crisp and his posture rigid with authority. Next to him, Mrs. Prescott dabbed at her face with a monogrammed handkerchief. 3 rows back, Daniel Matthews sat with his arm protectively around Claire's shoulders. The principal tapped his microphone. "Before we address the allegations of misconduct, does anyone wish to speak?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Claire stared at her worn sneakers, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The quiet stretched until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on everyone present. Then, from the second row, Ethan Prescott slowly rose to his feet. His designer clothes couldn't hide how his shoulders trembled. His usual confidence had vanished, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. "Son, sit down," Mr. Prescott hissed, reaching for Ethan's sleeve. Ethan pulled away from his father's grasp. His face was pale, but his voice carried clearly through the gymnasium. "I need to tell the truth." More whispers rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Prescott's handkerchief fluttered faster. "The truth," Ethan continued, his voice shaking but growing stronger, "is that I've been horrible to Claire Matthews. I've bullied her since the beginning of the year. I made fun of her clothes, her backpack, her dad's truck. He swallowed hard. I pushed her books off her desk. I spread rumors about her. I got my friends to laugh at her in the cafeteria." The whispers grew louder. Claire's eyes widened as she stared at Ethan's back. Daniel's arm tightened around her shoulders. "But Claire never did anything wrong," Ethan pressed on. "She never spread rumors about my family. She never tried to hurt us. Even when I was cruel to her, she stayed kind. She just wanted to be left alone." Mr. Prescott stood up sharply. "That's enough, Ethan. You're confused." "No, Dad." Ethan's voice cracked. "I'm not confused anymore. I know about Tommy." The gymnasium went so quiet you could hear the heating vents whir. Mr. Prescott's face drained of color. "Tommy is Maria's son. Maria worked as our housekeeper for 3 years. Ethan's hands balled into fists at his sides. "And Tommy is my half-brother. That's why you fired Maria when she started asking for help with Tommy's medical bills. That's why you're so desperate to keep everyone quiet." Mrs. Prescott let out a small sob. Several parents gasped. The school board members exchanged alarmed looks. "I was so angry when people started talking about it," Ethan continued, tears now sliding down his cheeks. "I blamed Claire because it was easier than facing the truth. I've spent my whole life thinking we were better than everyone else because we had money. But Claire," he turned to look at her directly, "Claire showed me what real dignity looks like. Her dad worked so hard to give her a good life. They don't have much, but they have honor. They have kindness." Daniel sat up straighter, his eyes glistening. Claire reached for his hand. "I'm sorry," Ethan's voice broke completely. "I'm so sorry for everything I did to you, Claire, and I'm sorry I let my father convince me that money and reputation were more important than truth." Mr. Prescott grabbed Ethan's arm roughly. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Sit down right now." But Ethan stood his ground, tears streaming freely now. "No, Dad. I won't help you hide anymore. I won't bully innocent people to protect your lies." He faced the school board directly. "Claire Matthews and her father deserve an apology from all of us. They never spread rumors. They never tried to hurt anyone. The truth came out because it needed to, because sometimes the smallest voice speaking truth is stronger than the loudest voice speaking lies." The words echoed in the absolute silence that followed. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was Mrs. Prescott's quiet weeping and the distant hum of the heating system. Every face in the gymnasium was frozen in shock. Parents, teachers, students, and board members alike. Mr. W.com, Prescott stood rigid, his hand still gripping Ethan's arm, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. In that profound silence, the truth hung in the air like a physical presence, impossible to deny any longer. The last words of Ethan's confession hung in the air like suspended dust motes in the gymnasium's fluorescent lighting. His shoulders trembled as he lowered the microphone, and for a moment the silence was absolute. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. The sound spread like ripples in a pond. First one, then 3, then 10 people joined in. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly English teacher who had watched the drama unfold all year, stood up first, her weathered face etched with emotion. Next to her, the basketball coach rose, his massive frame casting a shadow as he applauded with slow, deliberate claps. "That took guts, son," the coach called out, his voice carrying across the gymnasium. More people rose: the school librarian, the lunch lady who had witnessed countless cafeteria confrontations, a group of sophomores who had always sat at Claire's lunch table. The applause grew stronger, filling the cavernous space with a thunderous appreciation for truth spoken plainly. Mr. Prescott's face turned an alarming shade of purple. He grabbed for Ethan's arm, but his son stepped away, standing straighter now. The truth had lifted a weight from his shoulders, and even as tears streaked down his cheeks, a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Claire Matthews never spread a single rumor," Ethan continued, his voice stronger now. "She showed me kindness when I gave her nothing but cruelty." Her father. He paused, looking directly at Daniel. "Mr. Matthews taught her dignity when I was learning pride. I was wrong. My father was wrong." The applause swelled again, drowning out Mr. Prescott's spluttering protests. Students were standing on chairs now, whooping and cheering. Claire's choir friends hugged each other, crying openly. The principal, usually so composed, wiped at her eyes with a tissue. Claire sat frozen in her metal chair, her hand gripping her father's work-roughened fingers. She felt the warmth of his palm against hers, steady and sure as always. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of sadness or fear. "I want to apologize." Ethan's voice cracked again. "To Claire, to Mr. Matthews, to everyone who watched me bully and said nothing because they were afraid of my family's influence." He turned to face his father directly. "And I want to say I'm sorry to that little boy and his mother. They deserved better than our family's lies." The gymnasium erupted. The applause became a roar, punctuated by cheers and whistles. Mrs. Rodriguez, the Spanish teacher, embraced Claire from behind, whispering, "Justicia," in her ear. The school counselor made her way through the crowd to stand protectively near Ethan, who looked both terrified and relieved. Daniel stood slowly, pulling Claire up with him. His military bearing was evident in his straight spine and squared shoulders, but his eyes were soft with emotion. Other parents reached out to pat his back, shake his hand, offer words of support that were lost in the din of celebration. The truth had broken like a dawn over the gathered crowd. Mr. Prescott's power, built on wealth and intimidation, crumbled in the face of his son's honest words. He stormed toward the exit, his expensive shoes squeaking on the gymnasium floor, but few even noticed his departure. Mrs. Prescott remained seated, her designer purse clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Ethan made his way through the crowd toward Claire and Daniel. People parted to let him pass, some reaching out to squeeze his shoulder or pat his back. When he reached them, he stood awkwardly for a moment, looking younger than his years in his rumpled school uniform. "I mean it," he said softly, his voice nearly lost in the continuing applause. "I'm so sorry." Claire released her father's hand and did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She hugged Ethan. It was a quick, fierce embrace that spoke of forgiveness and new beginnings. When she stepped back, Ethan was crying again, but smiling through his tears. Daniel reached out and gripped Ethan's shoulder firmly. "You did good, son," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Real good." The crowd pressed closer, their joy and relief palpable. Someone started singing, one of Claire's choir friends, and others joined in. The melody of "Amazing Grace" rose above the applause, sweet and clear in the gymnasium's acoustics. Claire's voice lifted to join them, pure and strong, no longer afraid to be heard. Teachers were hugging students. Students were hugging each other. Even the stern-faced school board members were wiping away tears and joining in the standing ovation. The truth had set them all free. From lies, from fear, from the tyranny of status and wealth over character. Through it all, Daniel kept his grip on Claire's hand, their fingers intertwined, just as they had been since her first steps, since her mother's funeral, since every triumph and trial that had led them to this moment. Tears ran freely down both their faces now, but they were tears of joy, of vindication, of love proven stronger than any hardship. The applause continued, a soundtrack to their victory, a celebration of truth spoken and courage rewarded. In that moment, standing together in the warm embrace of their community's support, they were more than just a modest mechanic and his daughter. They were champions of something greater than themselves, dignity, integrity, and the quiet power of unwavering faith in what was right. The evening light filtered through the worn curtains of the Matthews' small kitchen, casting long shadows across their modest dinner table. Daniel and Claire sat across from each other, sharing a simple meal of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Comfort food for a day that had changed everything. The events at the school board meeting still felt surreal, like a dream they might wake up from at any moment. Claire pushed her peas around her plate, lost in thought. Her father watched her with gentle eyes, noting how much older she seemed than just a few months ago. Not just older, stronger. "You know something, sweetheart?" Daniel's voice was soft but firm. "Your mother would have been so proud of you today." Claire looked up, her fork pausing mid-motion. "Really? Really?" Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You stood tall through all of this. Not once did you try to hurt Ethan back, even when he was cruel to you. Not once did you spread gossip or try to get revenge." "I wanted to, sometimes," Claire admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Especially when Mr. Prescott accused us of lying. I was so angry." "But you didn't act on that anger," Daniel said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That takes real strength, the kind that matters most." Claire set her fork down and wrapped both hands around her glass of water. "I learned it from you, Dad. You never got angry when people looked down on us for not having fancy things. You just kept working hard and being kind." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. He cleared it before speaking. "Sometimes being kind is the hardest thing we can do, but it's always the right thing." "Even to people like Ethan?" Claire asked, though her voice held no bitterness now. "Especially to people like Ethan." Daniel got up and moved to the kitchen counter, warming up their cups of tea. "Look how that kindness affected him in the end. Sometimes people who act the cruelest are carrying the heaviest burdens." Claire nodded, thinking about how Ethan had looked standing up in that gymnasium, scared but determined. He was really brave today, wasn't he? "He was," Daniel agreed, returning with their steaming mugs. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, to stand up against your own family for what's right." He placed Claire's favorite mug, the one with tiny painted flowers, in front of her. "But you showed that same courage every single day just by being yourself." Steam curled up from their cups as they sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Through their kitchen window, the sky was painting itself in shades of pink and gold, the sun beginning its descent behind the rows of suburban houses. "Dad?" Claire wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I'm sorry about all the extra hours you had to work because of me. The dress for the showcase and everything." Daniel shook his head firmly. "Don't you ever apologize for that. Being your father is the greatest gift God ever gave me. Every hour I work is an investment in you, in your future. And watching you sing that night," his voice caught. "Well, that made every minute worth it." Claire's eyes welled up. "I sang Mom's song for both of you." "I know you did, sweetheart. I know." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. "And she heard you, Claire. I'm sure of it." They finished their meal quietly, the familiar comfort of their small kitchen wrapping around them like a warm blanket. Outside, the sunset had grown more brilliant, streaming through their window in bright ribbons of light. Daniel stood and started clearing the dishes, but Claire stopped him. "Let me do that, Dad. You've been working so hard." He smiled and sat back down, watching as his daughter moved efficiently around their tiny kitchen, loading the dishwasher just the way he'd taught her. When she finished, she came back to the table, but instead of sitting across from him, she pulled her chair around to sit beside him. The last rays of sunlight painted their kitchen walls in warm gold. Claire leaned her head against her father's shoulder, just as she used to do when she was little. Daniel wrapped his arm around her, and together they watched the sun sink lower through their small kitchen window. The morning sunlight painted golden streaks across Claire's bedroom walls as she brushed her hair, humming softly. The tune was familiar, the same song she'd sung at the showcase, but now it carried joy instead of nervousness. Her reflection in the mirror showed someone different from the scared girl who'd started the school year. Her eyes were brighter, her shoulders straighter. "Claire, breakfast!" Daniel called from the kitchen. She found him at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. The kitchen was filled with warm morning light and the sweet smell of maple syrup. Daniel wore his work clothes, the patches on his mechanic's uniform worn but clean. His smile when he turned to her held the same quiet pride it had carried these past few weeks. "Morning, Dad," Claire said, settling at their small kitchen table. The surface was scratched and old, but she wouldn't have traded it for all the fancy furniture in the Prescott mansion. "Big history test today?" Daniel asked, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of her. Claire nodded, cutting into her breakfast. "I studied hard. Mrs. Peterson's been really supportive lately." She paused, remembering how different things were now. Everyone has. Daniel sat across from her with his own plate, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Things have a way of working out when you stand firm in what's right. Through their kitchen window, they could see neighbors walking past, waving warmly. It was such a change from the whispers and sideways glances of before. The whole neighborhood seemed different now, or maybe they were the ones who had changed. "Oh, look who's early today." Daniel nodded toward the window. Claire glanced out to see Sarah and Mike, two classmates who now waited for her most mornings. They had never spoken to her before the showcase, but now they were becoming real friends. They stood by the maple tree, chatting and laughing. "Better finish up," Daniel said with a gentle smile. "Your fan club's waiting." Claire rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her grin. "Dad, stop." But she hurried to finish her breakfast, gathering her books into her backpack, the same worn one Ethan had once mocked. Now it carried different memories. As they stepped out onto their front porch, the morning air was crisp and clean. Their modest home might not have been the biggest on the block, but its small garden was well tended, and the American flag Daniel had hung flew proudly. Sarah and Mike called out cheerful greetings. As Claire started to join them, she noticed Ethan walking on the other side of the street. He looked different, too. His designer clothes were the same, but gone was the arrogant strut. He carried himself with a new kind of quiet dignity. When he saw Claire, he raised his hand in a small wave. The gesture was simple but spoke volumes about how much had changed. Claire returned it with a gentle smile, remembering his trembling voice at the school board meeting, choosing truth over family pride. "Hey, Claire!" Jessica, another classmate, jogged up to join their growing group. "Ready for choir practice later?" Claire nodded, adjusting her backpack strap. More students were gathering now, heading towards school. Each face held a friendly smile, a far cry from the cruel laughter that had once followed her through the halls. Daniel watched from the porch, his heart full. A passing neighbor called out, "Morning, Mr. Matthews." He waved back, remembering times when he'd felt judged for being a single dad, for his modest means. Now he saw respect in their eyes, not for wealth or status, but for something far more valuable. "Dad?" Claire turned back. "Walk with me today?" Daniel's face softened. Even with all her new friends, she still wanted her father near. They fell into step together, Claire's hand slipping naturally into his as they joined the stream of students and parents heading toward the school. The morning sun caught Claire's hair, so like her mother's, as she chatted with her friends. Daniel listened to their easy laughter, their comfortable conversation about tests and choir practice and ordinary teenage concerns. It was everything he'd ever wanted for her. As they approached the school building, Claire gave his hand a squeeze. Students called out greetings as they passed, genuine warmth in their voices. Teachers nodded respectfully. Even Mr. Seventu Peterson, the principal, stood at the entrance with a kind smile. "Have a great day, sweetheart," Daniel said as Claire prepared to join her friends inside. She hugged him quickly, whispering, "Love you, Dad," before disappearing into the building with the others. Daniel stood for a moment watching her go. The morning sun was bright overhead, and a gentle breeze stirred the flags on the school lawn. He looked up at the clear blue sky, thinking of his late wife, wishing she could see their daughter now. "Thank you," he whispered softly to the heavens, his heart full of gratitude for the hope that now filled their lives. The simple prayer floated up into the morning air, carrying with it all the struggles they'd overcome, all the faith that had seen them through, and all the joy that had blossomed from staying true to what they believed in. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel Matthews, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.